On3 has voted Texas and Michigan as the marquee non-conference game in the 2024 college football season. And when I look at the rest of the big non-conference matchups, nothing compares to two blue bloods going at it between Texas and Michigan in week 2 this season. We discuss on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are discussing On3's list of the top non-conference games this season, including Texas and Michigan being number 1 on that list. In the second segment, we're discussing some player notes we got from Inside Texas earlier in the week, some marquee positions heading into fall camp, where they may fall and who may win those positions heading into the season, those position battles. And then in the last segment, Arch Manning is finally in the game, right? When the game was first announced and, players started opting in and out, Arch Manning initially opted out, right? But about a week ago, or earlier in the week, I should say, with a week to go before the game is released, he came out with a commercial with Eli Manning announcing he is in the game, right? He is going to be in NCAA 25. So we discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So before I get into any subject matter, Texas, Michigan, anything like that, obviously prayers out to everybody who has dealt with adverse weather in Texas this week, especially on Monday. I live in Houston, so I've been dealing with Hurricane Beryl. That's the biggest reason that this is the first episode of Locked On Longhorns throughout the week. Storm hit on Monday. Really did not get power back for a few days. Always had water, thankfully. And even since I've gotten power back, my internet has just been shaky, right? So I'm still dealing with the effects of Hurricane Beryl, as I'm sure millions are still in the Houston area. And, obviously people have just been affected all over Texas. So, definitely want to give, a shout out and, continue to keep people in my prayers that are dealing with the inclement weather, no power, no water. And if your situation hasn't already been fixed, because like I said, I know that's still the reality for, almost 1 million, if not more than 1 million people in this area, then I hope it gets better soon, as soon as today or, hopefully this weekend for sure. Yeah, love living in Texas, but, at times it comes with things like this. So, when we look at it, talking about Texas and Michigan, just like last year with Texas and Alabama, it feels like the big non-conference matchup. It's early in the season. There's going to be some really good matchups week 1. But with Michigan coming off a national championship, Texas finally feeling like they're back at the pinnacle of college football, at least being one of the top 4 to 5 programs in college football where they belong. This feels like such a huge matchup, right? And then you have, the other storylines with Michigan coming off the national championship, their coach, their quarterback, their running back leaving, losing so many pieces. What will Michigan look like under Sharon Moore, right? And then you have, Texas going to the SEC, Steve Sarkisian, year 3, Quinn Ewers. Can they build upon what they were able to do last year, being, 15 yards away from meeting Michigan in the national championship? And when you look at it, it's almost, 20 years since that magical matchup between Michigan and Texas in the 2005 Rose Bowl, right? Where Vince Young goes crazy and they get that 38-37 win with the game-winning field goal. And that was the first time that Michigan and Texas faced off in their illustrious histories. Like I told you, 2 blue blood programs, 2 of the most storied programs in college football ever. And now, almost 20 years to the day of that first elite matchup, they'll face off again. And, I don't think it'll have the allure, that the Rose Bowl had with Vince Young in it, but certainly will be one of the biggest matchups of the season, right? And, On3, it says, at least in terms of the out-of-conference variety, right? The non-conference variety, it will be the best game of the season. So you have Michigan, Texas is potentially the best non-conference game of the season. And then when you look at conference games, I think you have to put Ohio State, Michigan up there as always, right? I think Ohio State, Oregon is going to be a game that provides a lot of fireworks this year. But I think Texas and Georgia is right there in terms of the best conference matchup this season. So, you talk about Texas, you talk about the brand, you talk about being everybody's Super Bowl. I know people like to push back on that, but you can make an argument that the 2 biggest games of the college football season, non-conference and in-conference, both involve Texas, and Texas versus Michigan and Texas versus Georgia, right? when you look at it, I think there's so many huge storylines in this game that make Texas and Michigan the best non-conference game. And we'll run through the rest of the list and you'll see that it's just not close, right? But I talked about you have a championship team coming off of a championship, trying to figure out where this Michigan program is headed under Sharon Moore, right? You're going to have a new quarterback going against a year 3 starter in Quinn Ewers, right? I think that should be advantage Texas, but that's certainly a huge storyline. Michigan brings back one of the best defenses in the country, so that they continue to ball on that side of the ball like they did last year, even though they're replacing their defensive coordinator? And will Michigan, the team that's won the last 3 Big Ten championships and been a threat to win it all for the last 3 years, still be that same level of program under Sharon Moore with a new quarterback? Or will we see teams like Ohio State and Oregon kind of leapfrog them in the Big Ten, right? And then when you look at the University of Texas, year 1 under Steve Sarkisian, 5-7, right? But they come back year 2, 8-5, and then year 3, we see that improvement that we've been expecting for over a decade, going 12-2, winning the Big 12 championship, and then getting to the college football playoff, once again being about 15 yards away from the national championship. And now in their first year in the SEC, can they continue that success? Can they build upon that success? And can they be a dominant program in the SEC? Because it seems like they're set up that way. So, like I said, 2 blue blood programs, 2 programs who average over 100,000 in attendance per game. Michigan almost up to 109,000. So, I mean, this is going to be one of the most anticipated matchups, one of the most heavily viewed and visited matchups in college football we've seen in the last few years. And certainly when you look at it compared to some of the other games in the non-conference schedule this year, I just don't really think they compare to what Texas and Michigan will bring to the college football landscape on September 7th. When you look at the rest of their list, they have Texas and Michigan number 1, Miami, Florida at Florida number 2. Most people don't expect Florida to be really good this year. It'll be an interesting matchup because of the rivalry in state. You got Miami, who, Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus predicted to win the ACC. A lot of people are high on Miami this year, but it doesn't feel like Florida is really, kind of meeting Miami where they are, right? Or it doesn't really feel like Florida is living up to their end of the bargain, right? If this was, 20 years ago, then maybe, but right now Florida is just a down program and Miami's still trying to figure out what type of program they are, right? So maybe 10 years ago, this would be a great game, and it still may be a good game, but not a lot of people are just anticipating Miami and Florida in 2024. LSU, USC. USC had 5 losses last year. We don't know what to expect from them, especially losing an all-world player in Caleb Williams. Then you look at, LSU. They've been good the last 2 years, 10 wins in Brian Kelly's first year, 9-3 last season, even though they had the Heisman winner in the regular season, 9-3, even though they had the Heisman winner in Jaden Daniels. And so it'll be interesting to see how both programs move forward after losing 2 of the best quarterbacks, maybe the 2 best quarterbacks, certainly the 2 highest drafted in college football from last season, right? I think USC, they still, have all the opportunity in the world to figure it out under Lincoln Riley, but now they're in the Big Ten, and LSU is a really good program with a lot of talent and one of the best coaches in the country. And like I said, he's won 19 games in his first 2 years, so has not been a slouch down there in Baton Rouge. So that's definitely going to be an interesting matchup. That one is on September 1st in Las Vegas. So a neutral site game should be really good. Georgia and Clemson, this is definitely somewhat of a rivalry down there in the South on August 31st. So opening week in college football in Atlanta. Georgia is the marquee team in college football. So a lot of people will be tuned in to see them. Clemson still does have Cade Klubnik, shout out Westlake, shout out the Austin kid. But, I just think at this point with Dabo Swinney and what they've done, or lack thereof for the last couple of years, people aren't just rushing to their TV to watch a Clemson game, nor are people just overly excited to watch Clemson play this season. So, I take that with a grain of salt. Notre Dame at Texas A&M, first week of the season. I think that's an interesting one. Marcus Freeman is still looking for that first elite season at Notre Dame. Notre Dame is a program that's accustomed to elite seasons, and they're looking for their first one since Brian Kelly left at Texas A&M. Raucous environment. I think any game in Kyle Field is worth at least paying attention to, right? Especially if you're a Texas fan. August 31st, first week of the season, and our first chance to see, Texas A&M post Jimbo, right? The first game of the Mike Elko era, and a Texas A&M team that a lot of people are still really high on. They think that they can actually reach their ceiling now or exceed it compared to, when they had Jimbo Fisher. They just feel like Mike Elko is the type of coach that can really get this Texas A&M program back on track. So I don't, but it remains to be seen. We'll see what happens, and that certainly could be a really good matchup the first week of the season. Penn State at West Virginia. Penn State, is in that breath of, trying to challenge the Ohio States and Michigans, and now they'll have to try to challenge the Washington, USCs, and Oregons as they have come into the Big Ten. West Virginia don't really know what to expect from them. The fact that Penn State and West Virginia is on this list tells you what the rest of the non-conference schedule looks like and tells you why Texas and Michigan is at number one. But I'm sure some people will tune into Penn State and West Virginia. Florida State at Notre Dame on November 9th. That should be a really good one. Possibly both teams, if Notre Dame takes care of business against Texas A&M, could be undefeated at that point. That is kind of later in the season, though. Florida State coming off the season where they went undefeated, right, and they got smacked by Georgia because they didn't care, after getting snubbed by the college football playoff, or at least that's what they say. And then, like I said, Notre Dame, an historic program, looking for their first great season under Marcus Freeman. So depending on what happens between August 31st and November 9th, that could be a really good matchup. But by the time that happens, Notre Dame might have 2 losses. Florida State might have 3, right? We might not be talking about a great matchup at all. NC State versus Tennessee on September 7th. That should be a really good one. Tennessee, a chance to see the young, kind of 5-star phenom and Nika Amaleva, one of his first starts. And then NC State has always been a decent program, never a high-end program, but a program that can provide certainly a really good game. Alabama at Wisconsin on September 14th. People will be tuned in to see Alabama. That's it. Colorado at Nebraska. I mean, Deion, Matt Rule, kind of, I guess, but people will be tuned in to see Colorado. So, in conclusion, Texas and Michigan is the best non-conference game of the season, and I think it's by far, as On3 thinks as well. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into some player notes from inside Texas. What is going on with some of your favorite players from your football team and some of the biggest position battles heading into the season? Once again, quick word from our sponsors, and then that's the second segment. So these are just some off-season notes from IT. Before you know it, the season will be here on August 31st. Fall camp will be starting soon. And, there's still some things to iron out, right, in terms of rotation, who's going to be starting, who's going to be the backup, who are we most comfortable with sitting out there in the fire, right? Not in the first game against Colorado State where damn near everybody on the roster is going to play, right? But in that Michigan game, when it gets tight, who is going to be on the field? And I think that's what you're still spending the next month and a half trying to figure out, right? And we have kind of some insight in terms of, those position battles and how certain players are coming along. So when you talk about the defensive tackle position, you're not going to be able to replace the high-end production that you got from Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy. That's just not going to happen, right? 2 top 38 picks in the NFL draft, 2 All-Americans. The chances of you following that up with 2 more All-Americans is just very unlikely. But we heard all offseason that Steve Sarkisian wanted 5 to 6 players at that position that he could truly trust, right? 5 to 6 players in that rotation that he could rely on to go out and make plays. And it feels like they have that, right? Maybe not, like I said, you don't have a Tavondre Sweat, you don't have a Byron Murphy. Maybe you don't have the 3rd best run defense in the country again, but you have 5 to 6 guys that can go out there and make plays in the run game and open up space for your linebackers and everybody else to come downhill and make plays. I feel like we have that now. You got Vernon Broughton. You got Alfred Collins, right? You got okay, maybe I can't name all of them like I thought, right? But Vernon Broughton, Alfred Collins, Tia Savea. They brought in Bill Norton and Jermaine Lowell. So that's 5, right? And then whoever they decide 6 is going to be Aaron Bryant, Sadir Mitchell, Alex January, whoever. But it feels like they have 5 guys that they can rely on to make plays. Maybe not the high-end plays we saw from Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, but it should be a serviceable group. The offseason notes from IT that I'm responding to says as far as fitting into the program, Bill Norton and Jermaine Lowell fit right in. A source says with every new transfer, you hope they come in and put their head down and work, and that's exactly what Norton and Lowell have done. They do everything right. They stay after what's required and put in extra work. They work and mind their own business. This is the value of bringing in experienced players you have good background info on, right? So like I said, can't expect the high-end production, but it feels like this group has 5 to 6 guys that they can really rely on, this season to come in, stop the run, and really help open up our pass rush for our edge players and linebackers coming off the edge. Silas Bolden still going bonkers, right? He's looking amazing. He's balling. A source says he's a really good in 7-on-7 because he looks like he's about 150 pounds. So we'll see what happens in pads. Bolden reminds one source of Xavier Worthy as a player. Arms are long like Xavier's. He has a huge vertical, a much bigger catch radius for a shorter player than you think, and he's a speed demon like X was. I think this is the year that we really see the offense just take that next step in terms of elite, right? That step in terms of you just cannot mess with this offense, right? I mean, you talk about all the receivers you have, and you could name a legitimate 4 to 5 man rotation without Silas Bolden. But I think the thing I like about Silas Bolden is he brings something that nobody else brings to the table, right? We have a lot of very talented receivers at the 40 acres, especially in the room right now. But only one of them is 5'8", right? Can play running back, can play wide receiver, can play slot, can play on the outside, can make gadget plays, can return kicks, can return punts, can just do a little bit of everything, right? You talk about that twitchiness, that speed, that quickness, that acceleration. I mean, literally, I think the two biggest home run hitters on the offense are Jaden Blue and Silas Bolden, right? But then outside of that, you have your complete receivers in Jonte Cook, Ryan Wingo, right? And then you got this little Silas Bolden guy that's 5'8", you can throw out there and he can just make crazy plays. So literally every answer to the question, or every question that should be presented to Steve Sarkisian's offense this year, we should have an answer for it. Silas Bolden didn't get on campus till May. It's only July 12th, and we're already raving about him, raving about Isaiah Bond, raving about Ryan Wingo, raving about Jonte Cook and DeAndre Moore. Like I said, this should be the year. Even though we lost a ton of talent last year in terms of our pass catchers, this should be the year that no matter what question any defense poses to this Texas offense, Quinn Ewers and Steve Sarkisian should have an answer for it. Matthew Golden, all healed. I didn't ask about his health, but heard back he's looking great, really good, a lot more healthy now. Though I wasn't really worried about it, I liked hearing about Golden's health unprovoked. The source goes on to mention he's a polished receiver, not the speed guy or the blocking guy, but he checks all the boxes. The source said he doesn't think Golden is necessarily like Jordan Whittington, but he has some of those qualities. I didn't even mention Matthew Golden when I was just talking about Silas Bolden and in that entire room, right? And so even though I think Silas Bolden has a superpower in that room that nobody else has. I mean, literally, you can go 6 deep, and in any given day, one of those 6 receivers could be your best receiver on the field. Like I said, there is no excuse for Texas not to have, I'll be safe and say, a top 10 offense this year. It really should be a top 5 offense, but in those crucial moments, in the red zone, on 4th down, on 3rd and long, right? Even 3rd and short, right? Texas should be able to execute because we just have way too much weaponry, way too much firepower. And once again, we should have an answer to damn near any question any defense can pose, especially Steve Sarkisian. He's seen every defense against his offenses. And at this point, year 3, Quinn Ewers should have an answer to everything he's seen previously in college football as well. What about big Cam Williams? This is a big thing, at right tackle when you lose an NFL right tackle in Christian Jones. The source was complimentary of the junior after being complimentary of him for much of the spring. He's doing what he's supposed to be doing as far as working and eating. He looks a tick quicker. It's harder to tell how the big boys look compared to the 7-on-7 participants, but limited returns are favorable. This is really good to hear for, Cam Williams, because like I said, he is replacing an NFL right tackle and Christian Jones, one of the best in the country. And, initially we heard that Cam Williams was a dog in the run game, right? Just moving people out of the way. But there were questions about him in the passing game. And, with him protecting Quinn Ewers' right side and, just him being a big factor in terms of keeping Quinn Ewers comfortable, not in terms of just making sure he doesn't get sacked, but keeping him comfortable in the pockets where he's not constantly worrying about, does he have to run or is he about to get hit? That's going to be a huge position for the Longhorns this year to make sure that we have enough time for our passing offense to be executed, especially down the field. It's good to see that over the course of the offseason, right? This is why you subscribe to these reports. This is why you read them. This is why you listen to these podcasts, because it's good to hear over the course of the offseason that Cam Williams has steadily improved. And I think he's really one of kind of the wild cards on this team, where if he has a bad year, that could really affect the offense. But if he has a good year, that could really take this offense to the next level. So really excited to see Cam Williams this year, and very excited to hear the reports that he has steadily grown. And I think he's going to surprise a lot of people this year, right? Maybe not a lot of people are even thinking about the right tackle position or Cam Williams, but I think it's really hard to replace an NFL right tackle. But it seems like we have our guy in Cam Williams. Can't wait to see the Duncanville product this year, just mauling people on the field with that elite height and size that he has at that position. Field corner competition updates. Well, it's certainly a competition between Gavin Holmes and San Jose State transfer Javion Cole, one that will play out well into August by the sound of it. on Javion Cole. He has some stuff to figure out with the playbook, but it's super twitchy. The source said you can definitely tell he's played some ball before, knows what to do within the scheme, but needs more reps to increase play speed. And then on Holmes, he keeps coming along. He's a good corner, needs to get better each day. Both Holmes and Cole have their days where one is better than the other. I asked who is the better athlete. Gavin Holmes was the answer to that question. It's nice to have two viable players at that position, but I think, with a month, maybe 6-7 weeks until the season starts, you not knowing who's going to be your field corner, you still trying to decide between Gavin Holmes and Javion Cole, even though I think they're both really good players, is potentially a cause for concern, especially when we saw in the back half of the season our corners and safeties getting lit up, right? The fact that we're still a month and a half away from the season, and we're saying we're deciding between two options, but neither one has really stood head and shoulders above the other one, gives me cause for concern that this passing defense is going to be a lot better than it was last season. Also, that's something to monitor when we essentially let Terrence Brooks and Austin Jordan just walk out the door, right? Now we're deciding between Javion Cole and Gavin Holmes, two good players, but it doesn't sound like either one has been able to separate themselves from the other one, right? So you lose two, very good rotational players for us and a starter in Austin Jordan and Terrence Brooks, and now you're having trouble figuring out who's going to be your field corner, right? After coming off a season where the last game we played, we got smoked in the secondary, and that was kind of the theme down the stretch, right? When we went against teams that could actually pass the ball. Not every team in the Big 12 could pass the ball. So, I think, Javion Cole or Gavin Holmes could be really good in that position. But like I said, when you let two really good corners enter the portal and what we saw at the end of the last season, the fact that we're still trying to figure out who's going to play corner for us, not ideal. Andrew Makuba likely to start at safety. Is too early to anoint a starter at any safety spot, but Makuba has improved over the spring, and he was already pretty comfortable in the defense. A source said he knows the playbook despite only being there 4 months. He doesn't bust. He tracks the ball well. He's natural back there. Just an opinion, but I'd be surprised if he doesn't start. I mean, the same. I thought when they brought him in from the transfer portal, 3-year starter at Clemson, Austin area kid, it would kind of be a, foregone conclusion that he would start. But, we do have Michael Taft, who's made a lot of plays for us. We have Derek Williams, who really came on last year. You brought in Jordan Johnson-Rubel and a 5-star and Xavier Filsami, right? And then you also had Jelani McDonald and Warren Robertson at that safety position. So effectively you're loaded there as well, right? And we're going to rotate safety, so it doesn't really matter who starts, right? Like I think Jared Thompson and maybe Jalen Catalon were our starters last year, but then ended up being, Derek Williams and Michael Taft. So it really doesn't matter who starts, but, I think Andrew Makuba has earned the right to get a lot of playing time, and I think he can really boost the safety play, especially compared to what we saw last year. So not sure if he's going to be the starter, if it's going to be Michael Taft or Derek Williams, but I expect Andrew Makuba to play a lot, and I expect him to be an asset for this Texas football team in the secondary. A quick word from our sponsors, and then my thoughts on Arch Manning being in the game. All right, so Arch Manning has officially announced that he will be in NCAA 25. He did this by an EA Sports commercial with Eli Manning, his uncle, where Eli Manning is, calling the play and Arch is responding to him, but also in the game. They call the play. He throws a touchdown. They get hyped, and then he announces he's in the game. And I love this for Arch, right? I think this is so cool, and I think this is cool for everybody that gets to play the game, right? You want to play with all of these players, but including a player like Arch Manning. And I didn't really get initially why he didn't want to be in the game, right? I thought at first, maybe the Mannings were trying too hard to protect his brand, right? I know initially they said they didn't want him to have any NIL deals until he became a starter, but they were paying people like $600 to be in the game. I just didn't understand why he didn't want to be in it, right? It felt like the Mannings were being too Manning-y, right? A little bit initially. And then we didn't hear anything really for like 3-4 months. And then a week before, we get the commercial announcing that he's in the game, right? And I'm pretty sure he's the only player that got an individual commercial for NCAA 25, right? Now there's some rumblings coming out saying that he was paid $50,000 to $60,000 to promote the game, which is a lot more than $600, right? I don't even think NCAA 25 needed that level of promotion because people have been anticipating this game for a decade. I think people were going to buy it regardless. I think people were going to play it regardless, but it certainly doesn't hurt right? To have Arch Manning, one of the biggest names in college football, promoted. And it's nice that he got a little bag to do it, right? 50 to 60,000. We could all use that in these times, right? So, it's good to see Arch Manning in the game. I certainly will be playing it. I certainly will be playing with Arch Manning, right? And now I can do my dynasty, play with Quinn Ewers, and then I can just transition to Arch Manning, then transition to Trey Owens, then transition to KJ Lacey, and then transition to Dia Bell, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, they're not going to be in the game, but you get what I'm saying, right? So, I just really didn't think that there was any initial reason for Arch Manning not to be in the game. And maybe this was planned all along that, he was going to come, in the 11th hour, promoted and get 50, 60,000 to do it, to give people extra motivation to go buy the game in a week. I'm not sure. But nonetheless, regardless of how it happened, I'm never going to, hate on my brother for getting some money, even if he doesn't need it, right? Even if his last name is Manning. Like I said, we can all use $50,000 to $60,000 in these times. And, if his commercial convinced even one person to buy it, right, then he did his job in terms of marketing. So good to see Arch Manning in the game. I will be playing with Arch Manning in the game when it drops. But just good to see him using his name, image, and likeness, right, to promote NCAA 25 and getting paid for his name, image, and likeness to the tune of $50,000 to $60,000. Once again, my heart and my prayers are out to everybody who's still dealing with the effects of Hurricane Beryl. I am still dealing with the effects of Hurricane Beryl, but I missed y'all and wanted to get some content out and talk to y'all. A lot going on with the University of Texas. It's heating up. We're now members of the SEC, and football season will be here before you know it. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for rocking with me, and I promise we're going to have a really fun season. Me and my co-host, Lacey Butler. Hook 'em. Peace.